We bet a few people who watched the ending of our previous video and the people seeing this title for the first time didn't get the whole idea of what we mean with a repeat.
We use that with a lack of a better word, but there are many things in a Zelda game that you have to do over and over again, and they can be both positive or negative.
For example, a repeat could be fighting a boss over and over in the same game, or maybe having to play a certain minigame over and over for some reason. We just think of the things you either need to do or are just very likely to do multiple times.
These things can be stuff you do repeatedly throughout the series, but we're mostly focusing on the things that are tied to one game. Also, remember that this video will be very subjective because there are certain things we'd love to do over again and there are others that aren't really that much fun. We have now picked the 10 things we don't like doing over and over.
Also, keep in mind that not all of this is super serious, as some of these choices are sort of humorous in some ways, and they're not always the worst thing ever. They are 10 things we thought would be fun to talk about, and we bet that we're not the only ones who would pick around half of these.
So hey, we're the owners of Triforce, I'm owner 2.
And I'm owner 1, and this is our list of the 10 worst, again for lack of a better word, repeats in the Legend of Zelda series.
Wind Waker is a fun and adventurous game. It's been both hated and praised for its art style, and there are other parts that it have been both loved and criticized for. While one criticism we have is that we don't find all the dungeons as interesting as other games. There are people that really dislike the hunt for the Triforce shards towards the end.
We don't mind this one bit, really. The sailing is one thing many people find boring with this game, but we rather enjoy it. It doesn't help much for those disliking the sailing that the hunt for the Triforce shards is happening with you sailing around the entire ocean and find most of these shards at the bottom of the sea.
This isn't what we find as one of the worst repeated things to do, because even before you know where they are, you gather these shards. But there's one problem. Link can't read them himself, and so he needs help to decipher them.
The worst repeat here is that you actually have to pay freaking Tingle 398 rupees for each chart you want to decipher. Tingle, the guy you freed from imprisonment. Sure, he gave you the Tingle tuner and left the picto box behind for you to grab, but you gave him freedom.
And after all that, you have to stand here and pay him this huge amount of money over and over again? Ugh, so annoying.
A Link to the Past is famous for many great reasons, but at the same time it's also infamous for some of the more wrong reasons. It's no secret that we both love and enjoy this game pretty much all the way through, but there's one thing that often can repeat itself that we can definitely get a little sick of.
All of you probably know what this is. If you didn't know, there's a huge worm monster acting as the boss of the Tower of Hera called MOLDORM. MOLDORM is so bouncy that the smallest touch, either by colliding with him or even using the sword against a wrong body part, will bounce you away. And oh, how lucky you are! There's an edge all around the platform where you can easily fall down.
And since this can happen easily, we bet you've often found yourself walking up those stairs to start all over again. The battle restarts completely, and all the damage that you've done to him in the previous encounter is now gone. Even worse is when you fall down the hole in the middle of the platform, because that makes you fall down in another hole on the floor below, meaning that you have to walk up 2 staircases to get back. Also, make sure you have a controller with a good D-pad. A crappy third-party controller did not help us at all when we played A Link to the Past randomized during a live stream. Yeah. Seriously, that's that D-pad.
Yeah.
Seriously, I had to move to the left, but it didn't help. Oh my god! I was walking straight up.
Yeah.
Seriously. Turn around! I went backwards. Come on. That was the D-pad, actually. That was the D-pad. Oh, freaking! I turn the other way. Come on! Why don't you turn?
Believe us, there is a great reason why people have been calling him MOLDORM.
This will be something in general for the series. Backtracking is something many people don't like. We, however, usually enjoy some backtracking. It's often fun for us to backtrack to find new stuff, either if you know about the stuff in the places you can't do anything with until you get a new item, or when you come back to discover something completely new.
It's a different story when you go through a tough dungeon, haven't found the compass yet, and you come to a locked door. How many keys do you have? None. Backtracking for that one key can be a real pain when you have to look for chests that you can't see on the map, or maybe there's a key hidden in something else than a chest that's never shown on any map in any game at all.
Personally, I don't really hate this myself, but haven't we all been there one time or another? A time when you weren't an experienced Zelda player and you got stuck easily because you missed something important. Backtracking to find that key can be really tedious at that point.
Especially when you think you found the right chest, only to find rupees! Yay!
Water dungeons. It's no secret that no matter how many people have come to our attention with their love for these dungeons, it has pretty much always been that one type of dungeon that has been strongly disliked by Zelda players. Heck, by gamers in general.
One of the reasons for this is how water is a liquid that actually can help create very interesting levels and dungeons. Because of it, you're able to swim, float, dive, walk at the bottom of it, and even be a sort of mechanic to reach new places. Oftentimes with this comes the ability to both change the level and flow of water.
While we might not hate it as much as many other people, we do find it somewhat tedious to raise the water level in the water temple in Ocarina of Time, change the current in Great Bay Temple in Majora's Mask, and don't get me started on the water levels in Jabba Jabba's belly in Oracle of Ages!
You do raise the water level in Lake Bed Temple in Twilight Princess 2, but you never have to change it back. That's what's annoying, how you are very likely to both raise and lower the water level in some dungeons, and that would often mean going from place to place to do all that, cause there's almost never the option to do both lower and raise the level at the same place. Majora's Mask is a very interesting game because of the 3-day mechanic. It's actually a very good mechanic that makes the world seem alive. The hours always count, cause doors will open and close at certain hours and other events will take place at certain times. It all makes sense that you would need to reset the cycle before the moon crashes, because it's pretty much impossible, for us anyway, to beat the game within the 3 days, even with the slow time.
But sometimes having to reset the 3-day cycle can be very annoying. There are certain side quests and other things you need to do at very specific times, which is fine, but it certainly is annoying if you're on day 2, doing a side quest, and you want to do another one that you have figured out you gotta do on day 1, so you have to reset.
It's with these instances we find the 3-day cycle a bit annoying, because you really have to start over and over again very often if you want to do most of the side quests, which this game is full of.
There have also been times when I've failed a side quest, like getting noticed by Sakon here at the very end of the Anjou Cafe side quests, or even failed to retrieve Cafe's mask. So I have to do things over again. And this side quest lasts through all 3 days. And that time, many years ago, when I got through Great Bay Temple and faced off with Georg, without defeating him by the time of the festival and the moon soon would come crashing, and having to start the cycle over again and go through most of the Great Bay Temple again? Ugh.
There are bosses we enjoy facing again. We've said before that we often have fun fighting bosses in a final dungeon that we had defeated earlier in the same game. Not everyone's great, but it's often a welcome thing when it's a boss fight we enjoy.
The Imprisoned in Skyward Sword, however? Okay, the Imprisoned is not the worst thing ever, and the first battle against it was, well, it was okay, but definitely not a favorite in this game.
When it turns out you have to face it another time, it gets a bit tedious, and especially when you fight it a third time.
Look, we realize that the imprisoned evolves a bit for each time, which changes things a bit. And there's a reason why it breaks the seal so often. It really is a powerful monster that's hard to contain. This is an embodiment of evil after all.
And it really helps out with Gruse's character development, which really is a good thing, and even though the boss battle itself isn't the worst ever, it's still not really that much fun. It's slow, it's tedious to get to the seal, those shockwaves from its feet. It gets pretty old quickly when you have to face it a total of 3 times, and that is not counting the boss rush.
The DS games. You know where this is going, right? They both have something that got introduced in Phantom Hourglass, with what we would call hub dungeons, meaning the Temple of the Ocean King and Tower of Spirits.
Temple of the Ocean King especially is one of the most disliked dungeons in the series from what we know. The point with these dungeons is that you go back and visit them in between every dungeon you complete. Temple of the Ocean King is a dungeon that even has you going through the same rooms over and over, and even though you come back every time with a new item that helps you get through the floors easier, it still doesn't make the fact that you're doing pretty much the same thing over and over much fun. You always reach new floors every time you're there, but it's still very tedious to me and not very fun. I like Tower of Spirits better, but maybe that's because I like Spirit Tracks better.
Probably not, because I like both Phantom Hourglass and Temple of the Ocean King better than Spirit Tracks and Tower of Spirits. But I can definitely see why both you and other people like them better. Me, however? I got tired of visiting Tower of Spirits so often. I mean, at least Tower of Spirits has you visiting new floors and doing new things every time you go there, meaning that you don't need to go through the same over and over. But even so, I found the Tower of Spirits tedious because of Zelda. Not her character, because I love having her as a companion, but even though the mechanic with her controlling a phantom is cool, I just think they overdid it. You had to do so much of it, controlling both yourself and her around, that I just got sick of it towards the end. So we have a different opinion on both of these, but at least I got some really enjoyable music in Tower of Spirits to keep me going.
Yeah, cause that crappy, monotonous and overused dungeon theme in the Temple of the Ocean King sure didn't help me.
If you're not familiar with this melody, then you obviously never reached the Stone Tower Temple in Majora's Mask. This is of course the Elegy of Emptiness, and its use is to create lifeless statues of the form you're in, either if it's human, Deku, Goron or Zora.
The reason why we put this song on this list is because you have to play it so often after learning it from King Eagle's Duikana and until you're done with the Stone Tower Temple. Hell, we were even tired of playing this song already before we entered the dungeon.
When climbing the stone tower, you need to do some puzzles by standing on switches to move some huge blocks that will create a path for you so that you're able to cross these big gaps. The thing is, you need to have something standing on those buttons to have the blocks stand in place. Thus, you have to play the Elegy of Emptiness to have the switch pressed down.
We know that there are other songs you play with an instrument very often in other games, like Zelda's Lullaby from Ocarina of Time and Wind's Requiem in Wind Waker, and while we too can get a bit tired of them, they're songs that you usually play with a lot of time in between. The Elegy of Emptiness, however, needs to be played many times in the same area, in which you'll only stay for about an hour or two, so it becomes pretty tedious to both play and witness Link playing that song over and over again.
And of course, if you're an idiot like me, you might tend to forget to switch the masks you're wearing, and instead of creating a new statue on the next switch, you just move the one you already made because you can't have two of the same placed out at once. And when pretty much all of the switches in these puzzles need to be pressed in the right order, you are very likely to screw things up a bit and end up playing this song a few more times than you really need to. Water dungeons. Yeah, the last time we talked about it wasn't enough. This element has also brought us another very annoying repeat that we find even more tedious than the water level thing.
You see, Nowadays it's easy to sink to the bottom of water in Zelda games. In Majora's Mask, you could decide whether or not you would float or sink to the bottom while wearing the Sora mask. In games like Wind Waker, Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time 3D, you can wear the iron boots as easily as with a press of the button.
That's not the case with Ocarina of Time on the N64. Before this game was remade, you had to go to the pause menu every time you had to switch between the Kokiri and iron boots. And thanks to the water temple, you have to do that a lot.
While many people have found the water temple to be tedious because of how you need to change the water levels often, especially if you mess up something, we find it more tedious because you need to go to the pause menu to switch boots as often as you have to. Even for the tiniest task you need to do this. There's no doubt that they made the 3D version more convenient, because we would have loved having the ability to bind the iron boots to an action button back then. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link has often been called the black sheep of the Zelda series, and there's a pretty good reason for that. This game is pretty different with its side-scrolling perspective and with a heavier emphasis on sword combat rather than use of items. It also introduced a lot of new things like experience points, the magic meter, towns, and actual NPCs that don't live in caves. Well, there are those too.
Most people probably dislike the game because of those changes that didn't stick with the series and are unfamiliar with them. But there are also those who dislike the game because of its difficulty. You know, some people actually find it to have pretty decent difficulty, but we think it's a pretty hard game. We have finished it a couple of times, but never without trouble.
The problem we have with this game isn't how it's different in general, because variety is a nice thing at times, but it's because of a few of these changes they made from the first game that makes this game very hard at certain times. This game is pretty difficult when it comes to enemies and bosses, but that's usually a thing we think is good. However, what makes the game harder is that you have 3 lives before you get the game over, which is very annoying when you're in a dungeon, and that's where the worst repeat in the series comes in.
Walking back to that current dungeon is the worst thing we have to do repeatedly in the series. In the original game, if you died, you'd just be dropped at the start of the dungeon. Here though, you get dropped back to the very first screen of the game, and you have to walk all the way back to the dungeon you were already at.
This is so weird, because the final dungeon has a checkpoint there whenever you get the game over. Believe us, that was a huge relief, because that dungeon is a real pain, but why couldn't it be like that with every other dungeon too?
It shouldn't sound too bad when you have 3 lives, because that means you have more chances to stay in the dungeon. But what makes it worse is that with the side-scrolling perspective, the game pretty much follows a Castlevania style, with knockbacks when you get damaged, and how you lose a life just from falling down a pit. We are super glad that that got removed in later Zelda games, cause we really think they could have just let us lose a little health instead of a whole life.
It's not the worst thing if it happens in the closest dungeons, but when you reach a lot further into the game, even reaching the dungeon gets much harder, and you are, well, we are very likely to lose a life. Or perhaps even get a game over before we even reach the damn dungeon.
Without a doubt, walking back to a dungeon after game over in Zelda 2 is our worst repeat in the series. How was that for a topic? We thought this was fun to make, and we hope you thought it was fun to watch. If so, leave us a like. And of course let us know if you feel us on any of these repeats, and leave your own worst ones in the comments.
And why not subscribe? Because our next video we go back their music list with the top 5 mini boss themes. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you then.